Nationwide is so much more than a great insurance company. They're one of America's largest financial services companies. Like how I'm more than just Peyton Manning. I'm also motivating Manning. When I say insurance, you say financial services. Insurance.
Financial services.
Insurance.
Financial services.
Now when I say Nationwide, you say is both. Nationwide.
Is both.
Nationwide.
Is both.
For your insurance and financial needs, Nationwide is on your side.
Nationwide Investment Services Corporation, member FINRA, Columbus, Ohio.
Hi, this is Gronk from Dudes on Dudes. I'm here to tell you about protecting your end zone with wet, extra large flushable Dude wipes. Unlike dry wiping with toilet paper, Dude wipes clear instead of smear. Wetter cleans better. Goodbye, dingleberries. Goodbye, itch and irritation. Plus, if you take Gronk-sized grumpies, or as I like to call them, Gronkies, baby wipes won't do. You need extra big Dude wipes to handle the job. So don't fumble the ball with toilet paper. Stop being an a-hole to your b-hole and start using Dude wipes. Available on Amazon and major retailers nationwide. Dude wipes. Best clean, pants down.
Jim Coventry is a fantasy analyst at RotoWire and host at SiriusXM Fantasy. He was a Fantasy Sports Writers Association finalist for Football Writer of the Year in 2022. He's a retired English teacher, he's a published author, and he loves to bring passion to his analysis. These are his late-round perspectives.
I very rarely walk out of any draft saying it was a good draft. You never do that.
You're right.
When I left that one, I go, this is a good team. I'll probably go 0-14 when I said that, but I go, this is a good team.
I remember that draft vividly. So for people who are listening and don't know, the Kings Classic is the draft that we do, and Jim and I are in the same division, and we do this draft every year. And we do it's a snake draft followed by an auction draft. So we do, it is literally, when do we start? It's like 9 to 5 basically, right? Like,
yes, exactly.
Like it's literally just like a work day, and it's us in the Hall of Fame drafting back-to-back teams. So like we do the snake draft first, and then we take a lunch break, and then we do the auction draft, and there's people watching us, and we're hopping on SiriusXM, and we're doing, we're covering it in every angle. We're talking junk to one another. It's a lot of fun. I wore my belt last year, this past summer.
You did.
And look, hey, if you win the auction league, I expect you to be holding that belt next year.
Oh, no. My goal is to win both and carry two belts. Yes, because I'm 6-3. I'm like 10 points behind in the other league.
The other one, I'm in first in the other one right now.
Yeah, but with points, I'm like 10 or 15 points behind whoever has the most points. Yeah. And I want to because of you last year, because of you carrying that belt. I said I want to carry 2 over my shoulders this year, and I want to flex while I'm doing it.
I'll tell you what, there's nothing that I want more than to win the snake draft again, snake league again, and just have 2 belts walking in back to back in a 14 team. So this league, again, for those of you who aren't aware, this league is start 1 quarterback, 2 running back, 3 wide receiver, 3 flex, and it's a 14 teamer, and there's like 6 guys on the bench. So like I was amped when I got Devon Vele for $3 out the waiver wire.
Right?
Like that's the way that this thing goes. Is like we get pumped about these like really tertiary, secondary type players that, every time I do like my 15 transactions article where I'm talking to people about who to add and drop and buy and sell. But the ad segment, I'm always thinking like, okay, I don't need to necessarily recommend this player, but this is definitely a player that I'm going after in the Kings Classic. That's just the way it is.
100%. And with those auctions, because there's 4 IR spots, and that's huge because the waiver wire is barren. So if you don't auction a team where you could get close to double-digit points from everybody in the starting lineup, once injuries hit, you're done. You are done.
You're done. It's so true. That's the one downside of the super large rosters is the fact that I only had Tyreek Hill exposure literally in these 2 leagues, and I got him in both of them because I remember in the auction, I was trying to bid him up a little bit, and then I got stuck with him, and then I took him in the 3rd in the snake, and he was actually looking like a decent pick before the injury, Mm-hmm. And when that happens though in these big leagues, you get screwed a little bit because it's just really hard to make up for that. But crossing my fingers that, look, how about this? You take the auction, let me take the snake, and then we can celebrate, next summer when we're in Canton together.
Because that belt over my shoulder is an auction belt.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then we can both have 2 of each. Then
we could do that. We could do that.
It's
man.
perfect.
And last year I could have had one last year, but man, I ran into the Patrick Doherty buzzsaw. He had Jonathan Taylor and Bucky Irving, and man, I was like, oh, come on.
Because he was in the championship and I beat him in the snake draft championship last year. And I couldn't let one person win both leagues. I mean, he just ran hot. I mean, he had great teams in both leagues, just like what you're doing this year. So I can't let it happen. I gotta do what I can to make it stop. Gotta do what I can. All right. So with every Perspectives guest, Jim, I like to kick things off by, sort of like let people get to know you a little bit better. We've gotten to chat now for the last few years at the Expo, which has been awesome, and get to know each other a little bit. But let everyone know like what your journey is, how you got into this crazy world of fantasy football, and what you're all about.
Fun story, actually. I was playing, I'm old, so I've been playing fantasy sports since 94, long time, so around 31 years or whatever, something crazy like that. But anyway, I had met the woman who I'm married to now in 2005, and she realized that I spent my Sundays doing nothing but watching football, to which she said, well, that's not going to work. And as the continuation of the discussion goes on, she goes, well, you better find a way to make money doing this. So I had already won one of those national contests for fantasies. I knew a little bit of something about it, and I was an English teacher and I knew how to write. And so basically at the time, it was still the magazine culture. It wasn't like the heavy online culture. It was there. So I basically found out contact information from a number of companies and cold called some places. And so John Hansen, a fantasy guru, I asked him for the first year, I go, let me just write for free for 1 year, because I just want to get some articles written. And he was cool with that. Let me do that. And it worked out. Then after that, Lenny Papano over at Draft Sharks hired me. I worked with him for 8 years. I was still teaching. And then RotoWire gave me the opportunity to work full time with them. And that's been phenomenal. But then I retired from teaching 3 years ago. And it's crazy, JJ, because you think you know something about football, but you're doing it part time. And then you retire. And all of a sudden, the levels that you can get to beyond what you thought you knew, it gets better. I didn't know, but I realized, wow, I am a significantly better analyst than I am than when I thought I knew something before.
The crazy thing is that, like, I always look at people who are starting out in the space, and I know the majority of people who are doing fantasy analysis have full-time jobs, doing other things. And, I was there, you were obviously there. Like we've all like experienced that. And it is crazy. Like when you go from, now, like me personally, I have like I'm trying to run this business and stuff. And like, there's other things, but for sure, I'm digging into this stuff way more than I was when, I was in my previous life doing what I was doing, which fortunately for me, I was able to get into the fantasy space pretty early on. But like, yeah, I mean, like I think that anyone who's like trying to do this and you're frustrated and you're like, man, these people are like coming up with some crazy stuff. And how are they thinking that, digging into that? It's just time, right? It's just, and there's still stuff there. I'm sure for you too, there's still stuff that I want to dig into that I can't even dig into because there's just not enough time to be able to do that.
You're right. You do run out of time. But as you're pointing out, it is crazy the levels you can get to, the micro stuff that you can find. And then the more you do year upon year, it builds. It like builds on the synapses and the hooks in your memory. And now the aggregation of information is even greater. And it's exponential at some point. It doesn't just add, it becomes exponential. So it's an unfair advantage, but we're blessed to be able to share the little bit we know with people that care to know what we know.
100%. I mean, look, the other thing too is that the more you do this stuff, the more you get quicker at finding things and doing, figuring things out that way. And then, you build out these spreadsheets and stuff that you're just always updating. And like, it's a lot easier to reference stuff and you just get better. It's like any other skill. You just hopefully, you don't miss too much, because it's inevitable that we will miss plenty. But do you think that like your teaching background has helped you a lot? Because you are in a sense still teaching in a way with this.
Yes. I mean, connecting with audience. I had to connect with teenagers. And good luck with that, right? But they loved coming to my class. And what I learned...
I got to say, you'd be an awesome teacher. I would love to have you as a teacher. That would be awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My students would speak to me on occasion about things that weren't school related, such as they enjoyed coming to class. They would say, you have like a passion about things. Do you speak with passion? And it meant a lot. It got them into it. And so you were able to, kind of attract the crowd, keep them beyond the 3-minute attention span that most people have because of social media. But yes, so I think that's one thing. And then also learning, you never speak at people. And I learned that teaching, you speak to people. And you speak with people. And I think that has carried over. So when I'm on XM or I'm doing shows, I don't ever want to talk at people. I want it to be a conversation, and I want to have, and I love it. So the passion's naturally there. And I think that all translates. So I think it's been a nice interaction with me and the audiences. Yeah.
The passion part is really like interesting to me too, because I do the solo show with the Late Round podcast and stuff. And like some people think that I'm like yelling at them sometimes. First off, that's my personality. You and I are both very passionate people just in general. So it's just part of our personality. But then also, when you're trying to do something solo like that, whether you're being a teacher or and you're trying to connect with an audience and, get their attention, you kind of have to be, take it from like a 75 to a 95. You gotta amp it up a little bit because then people will listen to like Late Round Perspectives, and I'm not like as amped as because I want, to just have a conversation with people and stuff like that. And it's just a little bit of a different dynamic. But when you're solo, you have to, when you're up there lecturing students, or when you're up there, or when you're doing a solo job on Sirius XM or something like that, like you have to take it to another level, or else people are just going to tune out,
They're not biting on the play action because there's no running back.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. I like it. All right, let's talk a little football. Something I love about what you do with your analysis is that you really will look at X's and O's and come at it not just from like a strictly data perspective all the time. You had some really interesting insights. I remember even at the expo and like on our panel that we do every year this summer. So I got to ask you, so as you're watching football this season, are there any sort of like macro trends that maybe entering the season you didn't think were going to happen and they're surprising you a little bit, or maybe they've just continued on and now you're like, wow, this definitely is a trend that's happening in the NFL?
The big one that I was on and what you referenced from the expo is I had noticed last year there was an incredibly large number of plays with only 2 linebackers on the field. The former NFL-based defense had 3 and even 4 linebackers on the field. Linebackers are your thumpers. They're the ones that are blasting your running backs, right? And I noticed 2 things, though. I noticed that there were 2 linebackers on the field, and that was about 65% of the time last year. That's gone up to 70. I'll circle this all together in a minute. Yeah. But the other thing I noticed was, and I knew this on my own, linebackers were smaller than ever because NFL defenses are concerned about stopping the pass. You need faster linebackers to get to people who are catching the football. Well, what does that mean? They're not bigger players who are going to blow up your running backs every play. Because at the end of last season, and this is where it began, Achane didn't get hurt. Kyron Williams didn't get hurt. James Conner barely got hurt till super late in the season. And we're looking at all these running backs, and there were like really few injuries to running backs. The McCaffrey injury was a preseason training injury, had nothing to do with football for the most part. And I said to myself, you know what? The easy answer is going to be anomaly. Every year there's some anomaly and it's not repeatable. But that's where I started looking into how often were 2 linebackers on the field. How much do they weigh? The average weight of a linebacker is down to 230. It used to be 245, significantly different. And here's the other thing. When there's only 2 linebackers on the field, you got 5 offensive linemen facing either 3 or 4, usually 4 down linemen, and you've got 2 linebackers. Well, you got 5 linemen and a tight end. You could get a hat on every one of those players. So, and I noticed when I was watching, running backs were often not taking the kill shots, which they used to take. And I believe that wore them down. So here was my take. My take was running backs, there will still be twisted ankles. That's going to happen. You're going to pull a hamstring. But the injury rate for running backs is going to go down significantly because the type and the number of players on the field. And that mostly is held this year. And that helped people that listen to myself in fantasy because they invested in running backs early, not wide receivers. And they mostly have had good injury luck. Now, if we screwed up on Breece Hall because he didn't play well, that's another story.
Sure. Of course. Yeah, I think that like obviously there was going to be like some general regression with running back injuries from last year just because it was almost impossible for there not to be, But I do think that's a really good point. Like, people are going to be listening and be like, oh, some guys are going to get hurt. You're not saying that they're not, like it's inevitable that it's going to happen. But yeah, I think it's a really interesting take. I also think that what you're talking about defenses and stuff like that to me is a big reason why we see this 12 personnel uptick that we've seen just generally. I mean, teams are running 12 personnel. Like some teams will run tons and tons of 12 personnel. And that all of a sudden just changes the dynamic of how usable the wide receivers are on those teams. You know, the number 3 guys and the slot guys. I mean, there's some slot players that just don't find the field because they're running these 2 tight end sets, and they're just not able to, you know?
Exactly correct. And teams learn. It's a chess game. The NFL is always chess. And you said the reaction to the light personnel on defense was heavier personnel on offense. You have more blockers. You can run more effectively because you can overpower the defense. Now, this idea about the light personnel and the 2 linebackers, I think that's not going to change for a few years. First of all, the types of players that have been drafted and cultivated are these lighter players. So to go back to heavier players, that's not going to happen overnight. But I still think the premium's going to be on stopping explosive plays in the pass game. Defenses are willing to let you run a 14-play drive because there could be a holding call, there could be a fumble, there could be a tipped pass. All those things can break a drive down. But if it's a 1-play 80-yard drive, there's no changing that. Yeah,
it makes a ton of sense. What do you think of, this is not related to any of that, but I still think it's pretty interesting from like a trend that we're seeing this year is the quarterbacks with the guys who coming from other teams that were kind of rejects of their other teams, you know, guys who we all thought their careers were over. Daniel Jones, Sam Darnold, you know, obviously we had Baker Mayfield last year. I mean, you could even throw Aaron Rodgers in there to a degree. Like he's not playing amazing football, but he's doing what he needs to just generally do with that like really low average depth of target, you know, work that he's doing in this Arthur Smith offense. I'm curious, like, do you think that teams, and this is just like a more of like, we're just chilling at the bar kind of talk. Like this is not like some super nuanced, you know, like super detailed, you know, stance or anything. But I'm really curious if you think that teams moving forward are going to try to maybe take on these projects like a Kyler Murray, because it sounds like that's not going in the right direction in Arizona.
Not so good.
Yeah, right. Like, because there are obviously only so many players that are capable of even playing quarterback, but even like you see these guys in these different environments, Joe Flacco going from Cleveland to Cincinnati, and all of a sudden, you know, he's at least putting up crazy numbers with these wideouts in this situation. Like, do you think that teams are going to just kind of lean into that a little bit more moving forward?
The teams that don't have a good quarterback will have no choice but to try.
Yeah, right.
Now, JJ, I want to weave this in, though. You brought this up, and actually, you have the trends coming in from last year. And I did mention about the personnel, but this one relates to what you asked me. I was furious in the offseason because everybody was saying, oh, man, Liam Cohen's going to Jacksonville. Yeah. Trevor Lawrence is going to be Baker Mayfield now. And I got furious because the NFL community and the fantasy community totally does not understand Baker Mayfield. Mayfield comes in the league in 2018, right? 14 games, 27 touchdowns, 14 picks. That was a great season, right?
Yeah.
The second year is the year Freddie Kitchen just forgot how to coach.
Yeah, I think a lot of us forgot about that season, but yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Baker comes back the next year, 26 touchdowns, 8 picks, leads them into the playoffs, but there was an injury. I think Nick Chubb maybe got hurt. Anyway, then the 2021, he hurts both shoulders. And that's when he became an outcast. He threw 17 touchdowns, 13 picks, but the man had no shoulders. Yeah. And so everybody said he's done. So then he had that reclamation year in Carolina, and the Rams were obviously just floated around the league. But since then, 28 touchdowns with Tampa Bay, and then Cohen comes in, he throws a 41. I get the career year thing.
Sure.
But Baker Mayfield was never a bad quarterback. He had 2 bad years. One was Freddie Kitchen's fault. The other was that he didn't have a shoulder to throw the football with. So anyway, I was saying all offseason, Trevor Lawrence ain't getting fixed here because Liam Cohen wasn't a miracle worker. He got a guy to a career year, yes, but he didn't have a terrible quarterback. So to answer your question, Sam Darnold last year went to Minnesota, loved it because the infrastructure was there. He knew he had an offensive line, schemed open guys. That worked for about 15 weeks. And this year, Clint Kubiak, that works well for him too. A lot of boot action, getting him moving. So I think it's finding those reclamation quarterbacks you're talking about. If they are put into a system, and Daniel Jones, he's been a point guard.
Yeah.
Very good point guard. The running game works. The line is great. He has a different type of receiver at every area. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say with Daniel Jones in particular, like the short intermediate stuff was never really his problem, you know, and that's where he can thrive now, where he's at in Indianapolis.
Yes. So to answer your question, as long as that quarterback is in an infrastructure that works, it's going to work. But that's hard to find that.
It's hard to find. Yeah. And it's a lot. And it's also one of those things too, where it's like, not only is it hard to find that match just from like an NFL team building standpoint, but us as people who are playing fantasy football, pinpointing where that will happen and not letting recency bias / sort of just a general bias of us saying like, hey, look, like these guys work, so therefore this guy's going to work, and ignoring, a confirmation bias and ignoring the guys who didn't work, which happens too. That's a difficult thing to do. So I think that is a really good thing to throw out there and remind people that we can sit here all day and say this is going to happen again in the future, right? Because it will probably happen again in the future. Might probably happen next year, but right, it does. The combination of scheme and coach with that quarterback talent definitely matters a lot. I want to ask you also, this is, we're in week 10 now. This is the home stretch. We got one more month, a little bit over a month until we hit like the fantasy playoffs and stuff. Are you managing your rosters any differently now than you were weeks 1 and 2?
In the leagues that have a waiver wire, and like the Kings Classic, where like, the third string tight end is the top guy on the waiver wire. But other than that,
3 tight ends every week, basically.
Right. Yeah. Oh man, you're playing 13 personnel and it's a fantasy league. That's not exactly the way they drew that one up. So for everybody out there, though, it's pretty simple to me. This point of the year, if your team is in playoff contention, now you're taking fewer lottery tickets. You are looking to find players who can get you a floor of points if somebody gets hurt. You don't want the boomer bust guy who you already kind of know if that player is kind of not having that season. Yeah. But if your bench guy is that and your starter goes down and you're in the fantasy playoffs and you're in a wild card game and your guy gets you a 1.2, season's toast. But if you got a guy in the waiver wire scoring 7 points, then you know what? That player for an injury replacement may be a much better use to building your playoff roster because you're just hedging for injury. At this point, you're praying the injuries don't strike, but if they do, you don't want the boomer bust guy.
Yeah. And also, from a running back perspective, it's even easier, I think, as an example where it's like, all right, you're sitting here, you're 9-0 in the auction. You're probably looking at your running back saying, Kings Classic is a bad example because no backup running backs are basically available at this point. But if you have Kyron Williams, you should have Blake Corum. If you're in a position right now where, and then I would argue strongly that if you're 4 and 5 and you're like an iffy playoff team, or 3 and 6, pick up Blake Corum, and then if that injury does happen, then all of a sudden you do have that lottery ticket that can really help you out. So
that is a big difference. 100% correct.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about trade deadline. It happened. It was predictably not nearly as fun as we hoped it would be. There were some rumors that Breece Hall was there was an offer for Breece Hall of a 4th rounder from Kansas City when they wanted a 3rd rounder. If Breece Hall would have gone to Kansas City, it would have broken fantasy football Twitter for sure. People would have just gone nuts. But we did get some moves. Are there any trade deadline surprise? Maybe the Breece Hall thing is a surprise to you, but were there any surprises stemming from that trade deadline, whether they were moves that were made or weren't made?
Since I know we'll talk about skill position players later, I will point out the Colts and the Seahawks made moves that make us think that they believe they can win right now.
Yeah.
The Colts might be in the conference with Buffalo and Kansas City, and to a degree, Baltimore. I know they haven't had a great season, but that could change fast.
Yeah.
But the fact the Colts went out and got a corner, and Gardner may not have played at the level he did early in his career, but it's a huge upgrade on what the secondary was like in Indy. So I think that move tells us how they feel about their team, that this could be their year. And the Seahawks realistically as well. We'll talk about Shaheed later, but making that move on offense, that also tells you, because their defense is the real deal, but they do need to have a little more versatility on their offense. So I think that was really important. And of course, the Eagles, this wasn't a surprise, but in fact, how do they do it? Cornerback Michael Carter, not a trade deadline deal like a week ago. Jalen Phillips, who already knows Fangio's defense and loved playing for him. And not that Jair Alexander is going to be good or a thing, but depth.
Yeah.
How do the Eagles keep doing it?
I just wish other GMs were as aggressive as Howie is. It would just make it more fun for everybody, And I think that there's like a lot of GMs, and this trickles down into coaching staffs too in the NFL, where they play scared because they don't want to make some move that can cost them their job because ownership is breathing down their neck, where realistically it should be the opposite kind of relationship, where it should be like, no, you're secure, things are good, let's do what's most optimal and what's smartest. But I do think that, it's interesting that the teams that made those moves were the two teams, you mentioning Seattle and Indianapolis, were the two teams that maybe didn't feel like, I think they feel okay about what's going on at quarterback. Don't get me wrong. But when you have Josh Allen, when you have Patrick Mahomes, when you have Lamar, whoever it is, you just generally are going to feel like you can overcome almost anything, you know? And so those GMs and those front offices are probably like, no, we don't need to be that aggressive and doing something here. Whereas the Colts are like, okay, maybe we get, week 9 Daniel Jones in the playoffs or something. And if that happens, we can still overcome this because now we have one of the best corners in the league on our team and we can, do well defensively. So yeah, I think that was definitely a nice little surprise. Like the Sauce Gardner trade to me was just, I was pretty shocked by that happening.
Bonkers. Did not see it. Would not have predicted it in a million years, but it was the smart move.
Yeah, 100%. And then, some of the other like non-moves, when you look at like New England was rumored to get like a Tony Pollard. And then there were some reports about how Tennessee doesn't want to deal with New England because of Mike Vrabel. But like, regardless of all that, some of the non-moves are still important to look at here too, because at the time of this recording, we have no idea what's going on with like Ramondre Stevenson, if he's going to play this weekend or not. But the fact that they didn't go out and do anything, it could signal either Stevenson's healthy. Like one of these things, you just have to think through them. Could signal that Stevenson's healthier than we think right now. Maybe this isn't like a long-term thing. Maybe it still is though. And they like what they saw in Travion and the Terrell Jennings kind of combination this past weekend. Like you got to think through that kind of stuff as well. And Kansas City, they did offer that 4th, but they wouldn't offer that 3rd for Breece. And does that mean that they feel comfortable enough with the trio that they have? Who knows? But I think thinking through, the stuff that didn't happen as well is still pretty important.
Kansas City was interesting. They were smart not to offer a 3rd. It's a day 2 pick.
Agreed.
This is a team, they have to build through the draft. Yeah. They have so much money invested in the quarterback and in Chris Jones. They have to use their draft. It's so important to them. It's not a team that's going to have a bunch of money to spend in free agency. So they probably stood firm on that 4th. They probably were countered with a 3rd. And I think organizationally, they probably didn't want to give a 4th, but they probably saw the potential to help them win this year. But it was smart. It was very responsible of them not to do that.
Yeah, it'd be really hard. I mean, if I were a GM, I'd just be like, all right, fine, we'll do it. I just want a fun player on my team. It'll be a good time. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it showed really good constraint. Let's talk about Jacoby Myers going to Jacksonville. What do you think of this fit in Jacksonville? Do you think that this is a big upgrade for the offense in general? Do you think it signals that Brian Thomas and they're not feeling great about him and that injury and just his play this year? Like, where are you at with that offense and that passing attack?
Jacoby Myers is a very important piece for what they want to do. This team wants to throw in the middle of the field. Those who are watching the games, it's very clear that Brian Thomas is not comfortable in the middle of the field. Mm-hmm. Either it's alligator arms, not running a route through, it's not catching the ball. He is squeamish for some reason in the middle of the field. On the perimeter, fine enough. Travis Hunter, we don't know how long he's down. And again, back to BTJ, we don't know how long this high ankle will last. But the other thing is they have Parker Washington, who is playing a little bit. Mm-hmm. You would expect Washington to be a full-time slot receiver. He's not. 2/3 of his snaps have been on the outside. Yeah. So Jacoby Myers was playing about 65% slot roughly for Vegas, but he has a long history of being able to play in the slot or outside. The reason this is important, they want to use the middle of the field. They need a receiver who can be very competent there. But the one thing that Liam Cohen has done with Trevor Lawrence is making it a point to get the ball out quickly. Yeah. Well, Myers is a player who'll be in his sight line, be reliable, doesn't drop passes. Little problem in Jacksonville with players dropping passes. So Myers kind of checks those boxes. He helps keep the offense on schedule. So I think he's going to be like a PPR magnet there for the way they run their offense.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. They came out and they said that at least this week we'll probably see Parker Washington in the slot more just because they said that it was easier for Jacoby Myers to kind of learn, that perimeter role, given it's his first week. I see it too. Like Jacoby Myers is good inside and out. Like he's not just only a slot guy, and everyone kind of typecasts him that way, but he very much can play everywhere across the line. And to me, like you're 100% right with the way that they want to funnel their looks and their target. They did that in Tampa Bay last year too with Liam Cohen. That's why Chris Godwin was having the year that he was having. And so they definitely want to do that. And then, last week, Parker Washington, he's had 2 games with a 50% or better slot rate this year. And in both of those games, he's had a 28 and 27% target share. I mean, he just gets peppered with targets when he does run in the slot. And so to me, I think they looked at this and they said, we want some versatility across the line where we can throw guys everywhere and not just feel like we have to run this offense through only a Parker Washington type player now that Travis Hunter's sidelined. So they said, let's get a guy that at least gives us options. Even if Jacoby Myers plays more perimeter than we expect or something, like they at least now have versatility at the line, moving guys play by play, inside out, shifting guys around. They didn't have that before at all. And I think from that perspective, it made a lot of sense for Jacksonville to go out and get Jacoby Myers.
Yeah, I mean, they clearly think they're making the playoffs. Record-wise would indicate that. I don't know that they actually do that. Right. But that said, they have to play as if they are.
Right, 100%. Let's do the same thing now with Rashid Shaheed. Is Cooper Kupp toast? Is Torrey Horton toast? This is another team that has run a lot of 12 personnel. I mean, second most in the league behind only Pittsburgh's running more. That's it. So how do you see Shaheed fitting in Seattle?
Yeah, we already knew going into the year they'd be real heavy personnel for two reasons. One is Clint Kubiak was there, and that's a staple. But the other thing was when you looked at their offensive roster, it was JSN, an old Cooper Kupp, and then late round draft pick Torrey Horton. So you knew based on personnel and Kubiak, that's how it would go. But here's the thing: first of all, don't everybody out there remember Shaheed played with Clint Kubiak, so he knows the offense. Kubiak knows exactly what he's getting, and I think this trade is for the playoffs. I don't think it's for week 10, 11, 12. Yeah. Because right now, this offense can win in most situations. But when they get in the playoffs and Sam Darnold is going to get heated up, whether it's the Rams playing them or the Eagles with a rejuvenated pass rush, somebody's going to send a lot of heat at him. And they need somebody to clear the field out for JSN because it's going to get really compressed otherwise. So having Shaheed, and Shaheed's just not a deep threat. Shaheed can run routes at all levels of the field, but he is a weapon who can improve the whole entire offense. When they're in two receiver sets, they're going to have to strongly consider putting him in over Kupp. Now, Kupp's like a third tight end. Kupp is a great blocker, and that's what he's being used as. He's out right now with an injury. So that's what they're going to have to balance because you don't want it to be where if Kupp's on the field, we're running, and if Shaheed's on the field, we're passing. You don't really want that. So they're going to have to figure out how that works, but they play such different roles. But Kupp is a blocker at this stage.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, look, and right now you're pairing Sam Darnold, highest average at the target in the league right now, with Rashid Shaheed, who this year with the Saints had like an 11.3 ADOT or so. Last year with Clint Kubiak, 18.1 average at the target. I mean, you're pairing a strong arm quarterback who gets the ball downfield with one of the best deep threats in football, to be honest with you. I mean, underrated, sure, but a really, really good get behind the defense kind of player. And so from that standpoint, I think it makes a lot of sense. And, you're getting insurance too for like I don't want to say this and people take away that I think Torrey Horton is ahead of him in the depth chart, but you're getting insurance just at the position in general, right? Where you're not having to rely on a day 3 guy who's definitely played well. I think Torrey Horton has a bright future, but
yes,
if you're going to be a serious team that makes a run in the playoffs, that's pretty difficult to lean on, as like you said, you get tougher competition and you need to rely on someone to really stretch the field.
Yeah, Torrey Horton is, like you said, he's made plays, but he's a developing player. Don't mistake that for a minute. Short and intermediate area, he has a lot to work on. He has to refine the game, and that's fine. It'll get there. But right now, Shaheed is a 3-level threat for them. And like you said, that's exactly, they need that versatility now.
Yeah, I think they might run a little bit more 11 personnel too. They might at least gives them the option. Again, this is about, to me, when teams do stuff like this, it's about optionality. And as much as we sit here and we're like, yeah, there's probably better, if Rashid Shaheed went to the Bills, it would have been more fun for fantasy. Or if, now Torrey Horton doesn't matter in fantasy and all this, and we get frustrated about it. But realistically, just from if you just look at it from a front office standpoint, I think both of these wide receiver moves made a lot of sense, even if the dots weren't fully connected pre-deadline. I don't think anyone was sitting, most people with Jacoby Myers was saying going back to New England or Pittsburgh, or he's going to go to Buffalo, and both guys, I guess, were tied to Buffalo. I think the landing spots were a little bit surprising, but they make sense.
JJ, one last thing. Now, the one problem that Seattle would have if they go with 11 personnel, 3 receivers a lot, is the potential of teams sending extra pressure at Darnold.
Yeah.
A lot of the beauty of where he's at. But now I think where you're totally right on that, if they're trailing in games, because you kind of got to go 11 personnel when you're trailing. And now to add that firepower in when you have to do it. But I think on a base down, I think they have to be real careful about how often they use lighter personnel because Darnold, we know the story on him. If he gets heated up, it doesn't end well.
Yeah, I also think, I mean, this is more of like a secondary effect of all of this, but they've struggled to run the football this year, like tremendously. And at least you're kind of bringing guys along with you. If you get a guy like Shaheed and guys are going to maybe be a couple yards further back to maybe open up some more running lanes, at least a little bit for Walker and Charbonnet.
No question. Couldn't agree with that more.
This message is brought to you by Apple Card. Does this sound familiar? You're in line at checkout, cart full of items, your toddler is screaming for a treat, and you left your wallet in the car. Or was it at home? No need to panic. With your iPhone in hand, you can tap to pay using Apple Card with Apple Pay, and you'll earn unlimited daily cash back when you do. So if your credit card is an Apple Card, maybe it should be. Subject to credit approval, Apple Card issued by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, Salt Lake City branch. Terms and more at applecard.com.
Nationwide is so much more than a great insurance company. They're one of America's largest financial services companies. Like how I'm more than just Peyton Manning. I'm also motivating Manning. When I say insurance, you say financial services. Insurance.
Financial services.
Insurance.
Financial services.
Now when I say nationwide, you say is both. Nationwide.
Is both.
Nationwide.
Is both.
For your insurance and financial needs, Nationwide is on your side.
Nationwide Investment Services Corporation, member FINRA, Columbus, Ohio.
I mentioned him actually a second ago, but Travion Henderson, I'm curious about your thoughts on what you saw from him last week, and if you think that there's some hope for us Travion drafters out there.
You know, they played Atlanta last week. Atlanta is a lighter defense. You can run on them, and the Patriots were able to run on them. But what I've been saying all year, and you know this, and everybody out there knows this, they've proven to us, the Patriots, they do not want Henderson to be the guy. And I know he played a heavy snap share. I know his snaps were in the 70-something% range, but touch-wise, it still was close enough. Whereas you saw Jennings get 11 carries. And so it was 12 touches total, 18 touches for Henderson. Game script worked well for them. They were able to, in most of their schedule being so easy, they can kind of stay in this game script. But they've made it so clear that Henderson, they don't want him being the guy on all the touches. Don't know why. Don't know what they see, but they must see something in practice. And if Stevenson does come back, it's probably right back to where it was. It was a great opportunity to see a good game out of Travion Henderson. But still, 12.7 PPR points with that workload. It's okay. Yeah. Jennings at 11. Jennings scores a touchdown. And there's the other problem. Jennings scores the touchdown. So good news for Henderson investors. Definitely better than the news you saw the first 8 weeks. And it's a sign of things to come. But I don't think they're going to center the offense around him at any point.
I think the big problem for him, well, I've said this on the show, and I remember talking to some of my subscribers about this on I do a Tuesday waiver wire Q&A, and I pulled up his rushing charts. And a huge issue for him up until a couple weeks ago was that they just kept running him up the gut between the tackles. And he's just...
Why?
Yeah, that's not the kind of player he is. Like, look at what he was at Ohio State even. He was always like a tandem back. You know, like, I don't think the expectation should ever have been that Travion Henderson was like a 90% running back, you know, an 80% plus running back rush share kind of player. It's more so that we're drafting him because the receiving upside could be tremendous if they deploy him in a way that other Josh McDaniels running backs have been deployed in the past, right? Like there's like my stance with him, because I really liked him as a prospect and I liked him entering drafts this year. And my stance on him was very much that if he does see like a 12, 13% target share, which I thought was definitely in his range of outcomes, and then he only had half of the team's running back rushes, which was also very, very possible.
Sure.
That alone gives you borderline RB1 numbers in PPR leagues. Like that alone can get you there and get you where you want to be. It's just that they've not used him in space that much, you know, as a receiver. We saw it a little bit last week. You know, they finally were targeting him at a higher rate, you know, clearing things out a little bit for him and letting him do stuff, you know, in that passing game. But unless we see that more consistently when Ramondre's active, that's the thing that just scares me. You know, I'm excited that he's getting an opportunity. I have him on team still. And if Ramondre's out, I'll probably use him this weekend because it's a good environment in general. But yeah, I mean, like it's just a shame because I just don't think we're going to see that the pass catching ceiling just hasn't been there. And that's the problem.
No. And you know, Drake May is such a good quarterback. he's not looking just to check it down.
Right.
And so a lot of those aren't designed. A lot of the running back catches, as you know, and your audience knows,
Yeah.
they're not designed. But Drake May is like full field reads, and he knows when to run. He knows exactly when to do it himself.
Yeah.
He's a really, really good quarterback, much better than I thought he'd be coming out. I thought he might be maybe a good runner and maybe an average passer. Wow, has he exceeded expectations?
Yeah, I mean, this deep ball game has been amazing. I mean, everything has just been awesome for Drake May. So yeah, that's a really good thought. What about Kyle Monangai? Because Monangai is someone. I mean, I didn't really care for him as a prospect that much. I thought he was just going to be fine.
Nobody did.
More replacement level type player. Yeah. But these are these situations where when the cost from a fantasy perspective doesn't necessarily say that people are like super hyped about a player, I'll still lean into it. Like I still have a decent amount of Monangai and best ball and stuff just because, there was a situation where when we see day 3 running backs hit as rookies, it's usually almost always because there's an open backfield where we don't feel great about who the starter is. And we, didn't feel amazingly great. No one felt like super confident about DeAndre Swift entering the season. But last week, we get him against Cincinnati. We get him in the greatest matchup imaginable for a running back this year, and he balls out. He was great. But do you credit that the matchup, or do you credit Monangai for that performance?
I will first say this. The Bears have coached up and gelled that offensive line to an elite level. This is one of the best run blocking lines you will see in the NFL this year. Detroit hasn't played to their levels. This line is the line for running. And coming out of the bye, whatever they did up to the bye and through the bye, they got it all together. They stormed, and Washington stinks, they stormed them. New Orleans has a good run defense. The Bears stormed them with both running backs. And then obviously, Cincinnati, who can't tackle, Monangai does it there. Monangai has been regularly seeing 4 to 7 carries a game. The double-digit win against New Orleans, he got more as a double-digit win. Yeah. And then obviously the game that he was the only running back. And DeAndre Swift, you brought this up the preseason stuff. The coach was very adamant that he loves Swift. And they had chances to bring in Dobbins and others, and they didn't even, I don't even know they picked the phone up.
Right.
So they believe in Swift. And Swift, if he's healthy, has done nothing to lose his role. Yeah. Nothing. Now, maybe they decide to scale back a few touches. I think that's in the realm because if he's dealing with injuries, then maybe Monangai's at 4 to 7 carries in competitive games. Maybe now we're looking 7 to 10. But until DeAndre Swift does something that makes the coaching staff say, we don't want you on the field so much, I think it's his job. But Monangai, I do think gets a bump. What do you think?
No, I would agree with that completely. And the other thing that I think is incredibly important here is that Monangai is not a plus as a pass catcher. Like it's just not, that's not part of his game. And so, he's very much, they drafted him to be an early down bruiser to complement. He is a good complement to what they have in DeAndre Swift realistically. And Swift is sort of playing that role that I just talked about with Travion Henderson, that Henderson could have been playing, maybe in that same offense, but they already had Swift. But regardless, Swift is going to be the pass catcher in that backfield. And that's the value in fantasy football. Yes. Maybe Monangai takes on some more goal line work too, and that hurts Swift a little bit. I do think what we saw from him, regardless of opponent, I don't like to only blame opponent. I think that we have to give it context and say, yeah, of course, it's a very easy opponent. And so there, Marvin Harrison Jr. this past week, yes, but he also, that touchdown that he had was incredible, right? He was great in that game against Dallas, aside from, what that coverage does to perimeter wide receivers in particular. And it's no different for Kyle Monangai, going up against Cincinnati. Most running backs in that position are going to have a day, but he had a really good day. He looked good. He's able to carry a big workload. He's a good backup running back in the league right now who can then take on some work now from that starter, like you said, who probably doesn't need to take on a ton of work, DeAndre Swift, just because of his play style and stuff. So with that all being said, I want to do what I've been doing on Perspectives, which is taking a player and say, do you want this player or this player rest of season? And we're going to go through a bunch of running backs, and we can kind of talk about these running backs too, so that people can see where our heads are at with these guys. So I'll start Kyle Monangai rest of season or Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt rest of season.
I'm going with Monangai. I am not a JCM guy. I told people before the season, he's not a pass catcher. Yeah. Most weeks he's going to get you 2 to 7 fantasy points. He'll have the occasional game where he scores. Other than that 150-yard scrimmage game against the Chargers, the last 5 weeks, it's exactly who he's been. Yeah. He's 2 to 7 points a game. So Monangai, I easily go over him.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing, I've mentioned this on one of my shows a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was even last week, but Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt went from being really good at gaining 10 or more yards, more explosive plays, and he's been horrible at it over the last 4 or 5 weeks. And when you're a running back and you're going through that stretch, because every running back will go through some stretch like that, it happens. It's just some of it's fortune, some of it's opponent, all that kind of stuff. But the problem with a player like JCM is that, like you said, he's not a pass catcher, and he wasn't that in college, and they're using Jerry McNichols there now in the NFL. And when you don't have that backbone of being a pass catcher and you're not creating explosive plays on the ground, this is what you get, right? You're getting that 2 to 8 or 7 PPR points per contest, which is sinking your fantasy team unless you're in a very, very, I actually have him in the auction league for Kings Classic. And sometimes I just have to play them because we don't have any other options, right?
No options.
But it's a really difficult spot for him to be in. I think the one piece of hope for JCM right now is, number one, he gets more explosives. Number two, the schedule is okay moving forward. Number three, they just want to see what they have in him moving forward. But I agree with you. I have Kyle Monangai over Krosky-Merritt.
Real quick on that, though, not having Jaden Daniels, and I don't know how long did he goes. That's a problem because defenses, what do you do now? You compress the field. You do not care if Marcus Mariota throws deep, and no Terry McLaurin. He's probably down for a while. So now all of a sudden, when you have Daniels, you got to worry about the deep ball, which allows more explosives in the run game. But now I think everybody's crowding in. You might see some zero covers. You might see some safeties both in the box. Yeah, that's a great point. All right, let's say Kyle Monangai or Ramondre Stevenson. I am going with Monangai here because we've seen some 7 carry for 13-yard games. We've seen some really bad games from Stevenson when he's gotten work, and now he's hurt, and we don't know the level of work. So we'll go Monangai here.
The other thing with Stevenson, you look at his game logs to remember and refresh your mind about what he's done when. He had that really good game against Miami where he made that great catch, probably the best catch of his career, arguably, that over the shoulder. That was a great outing for him. He really hasn't done anything outside of a game then against Tennessee, who also, good game script, all that kind of stuff, and also can't stop the run very well, very frequently. And so 2 really good running back matchups are the only 2 games where Ramondre Stevenson was able to really do much. And then obviously now you have the injury. And then, we're saying this our projection and prediction about Kyle Monangai and how much work he might see. I still think that we have to consider in our range of outcomes that he does see more work. That's still very possible that ends up happening when DeAndre Swift is back. So, yeah.
And Swift, although he's been healthy the last couple of years, he has an injury history. So part of this, when I'm answering, I'm baking in the opportunity that he could see more work, like you said.
Yeah. All right. How about Kyle Monangai? It's crazy that we're even saying this.
Right?
Kyle Monangai or Alvin Kamara?
Kamara is averaging 5 PPR points over the last 3 games. Not only is he toast, but his center Eric McCoy's done for the year. They traded away left guard Trevor Penning, and they got Tyler Shuck at quarterback, who nobody's worried about him throwing deep, I don't think, because they're going to rush him. So it's Monangai.
Most 12-team leagues, are you dropping Alvin Kamara?
You have to, and here's why you have to drop Alvin Kamara. Unless you have absolutely nobody to put in a lineup for a bye week, you can't have the temptation of putting him in your lineup.
He could be a sabotage drop too, right?
Yes,
you drop him, someone else picks him up, and then they're like, "Oh, I got Alvin Kamara," and then they get 6 points. And it's just he's not doing anything for them. But yeah, it's tough out there for Alvin Kamara right now. And obviously age is playing a factor to some degree too. I mean, there's just a lot of things working against him.
Nationwide is so much more than a great insurance company. They're one of America's largest financial services companies. Like how I'm more than Saquon Barkley, the NFL's reigning leading rusher. I'm also the NFL's leading husher. Shh, hush up back there. Wow, I might have just set the hushing record. Well, almost. For your insurance and financial needs, Nationwide is on your side.
Nationwide Investment Services Corporation, member FINRA, Columbus, Ohio.
Time is precious, and so are our pets. So time with our pets is extra precious. That's why we started Dutch. Dutch provides 24/7 access to licensed vets with unlimited virtual visits and follow-ups for up to 5 pets. You can message a vet at any time and schedule a video visit the same day. Our vets can even prescribe medication for many ailments, and shipping is always free. With Dutch, you'll get more time with your pets and year-round peace of mind when it comes to their vet care.
How about about Tyrone Tracy? This one I think is pretty interesting versus Kyle Monangai.
I first want to say this. Last week, my recommendation to the RotoWire people was this. I said, if you have a waiver spot, pick up Tracy and immediately trade him. Because we learned last year, he had that week 5 to 10. He was 5.4 yards per carry. He looked great. After that, he was toast. He was worn out already. Because in the last, from week 11, I think they had a bye in week 11. So from the rest of the season, that 5.4 yards per carry went down to 3.4. He was already done. Mm-hmm. This year, limited work, 3.4 yards per carry again. So he is not a good running back. He is a rotational guy, and immediately Devin Singletary was a big part of the backfield. So even though that's said, I will take Tracy over Monangai because I do think there's some receptions there. Yeah. I think his weekly floor could be usable. Whereas, again, there's the uncertainty with Monangai, but it's close.
Yeah, I think that's a good take. How about RJ Harvey in what people are now saying he's the official joker in the Broncos offense?
Right. You know, Harvey's a tough one. Yeah. Because you notice when they're winning games or they have a perceived easier opponent, they scheme him up touches.
Yeah.
But if they don't have a game like that, he's a non-factor. That said, he's had ceiling games already.
Yeah.
Where it's not just the one against the Bengals that Monangai had. I probably lean Harvey.
Yeah. I should have prefaced too that we are recording this before the Thursday night game, and this will be out on Friday. So if any of us are wrong about this stuff, you can't come at us if Harvey goes nuts or anything like that. Yeah. Here's another. I mean, I think all these are kind of interesting in general, but how about Kenneth Walker in a split backfield himself?
I was so out on Walker this year. Every year, people got to make a narrative for this guy. Every year, it's a narrative. His ADP has always been higher than what he finished as. And I said, oh, great, they're going to run the outside zone. I go, well, guess what? Everybody knows they're going to run that. And Kenneth Walker is not an inside runner. And so when he gets the ball, you automatically start going outside. If he doesn't get outside, he's done. Well, that's kind of what he's been. But I'll say this. He has a floor. The floor is not great. And there is no ceiling. Week 2, I think he had a ceiling. And they had one other game where he punched in a couple touchdowns with 39 yards. Yeah. But I'll still take Walker here because he has a floor. And kind of like Monangai, if Charbonnet were to miss time, then he'd be in for bigger volume. So for me, that one's fairly easy with Walker, although not excited about him as a player at all.
Right. I do think that is an easy way to think of the tiebreaker too. If you were to say like, oh yeah, I like Monangai just as much as Walker week to week from a projection standpoint, like hypothetically, if you said that, I do think that you have to think of the scenario of, okay, what if this player is out, that being Charbonnet or DeAndre Swift? If we assume DeAndre Swift and Zach Charbonnet are just out rest of season, I think everyone would be ranking Kenneth Walker ahead of Kyle Monangai. So that's sort of an easy way to tie break there. Similar situation would be with David Montgomery, and that's the last one that I want to get to. So David Montgomery versus Kyle Monangai.
This one is tough because numbers are numbers.
Yeah.
And the interior offensive line is what I thought it would be. It's when they face they had 3 games, the Lions, that faced 3 teams that could push the interior, and the run game tanked in all 3 of those. But they're not going to see that every week.
Yeah.
So I will go with Montgomery here. But Montgomery's a matchup play. If you ever see them playing a team with a death potential on the interior, you can't play him. But most other games, he's fine. So I'll go Montgomery.
Yeah. And then another guy, if Jahmyr Gibbs went down, knock on wood, everybody, please, right now. But if Jahmyr Gibbs went down, then Montgomery would be someone that, he'd probably be a fringe RB1, basically, just because the offense we know has some firepower. Let's talk about the Chargers real quick with this Joe Alt injury. Are you nervous about what we could see there and how do you think things could change? Like, do you think that the target distribution and who they're looking at might be different? Do you think that they might go with a different kind of running back just because, Kamani Vidal is not necessarily the biggest guy in the world? Like, is there any shifts that you see with this injury?
When Alt first got hurt a number of weeks back, I told, again, people that listen to my stuff, I said, this is what the Chargers will do. They know their offensive line's impacted, so they will just now get the ball out extremely quick. It's going to be a heavy dose of Lad McConkey. So at the time, he hadn't done anything. I looked for his breakout here. Keenan Allen will keep seeing targets. And I mentioned Gadsden may see more targets because of the underneath. They're going to have to get it out. But Herbert has 3 receivers who could get open fast. And so I think that's just what continues. It's going to be get the ball out quickly. That's going to be because teams are going to try to heat up that offensive line. So the only antidote, but I also said the person that would lose would be Quentin Johnston. And of course, last week I loved him because Alt was back and he got the touchdown, but Quentin Johnston's back out of the circle of trust because there are not going to be long developing plays and they can't take a chance that a play will have time to develop. So everything's going to be quick. Vidal, he's just a function of who they play. Two terrible games, two great games, but it's going to be all quick game. So PPR, you love the reception totals for all three of Gadsden, Allen, and of course, Ladd.
Yeah, I agree there. I mean, even like when with QJ's injury and such, like they've been deploying him more as like how they did in 2024 more recently, and that's a little bit of a problem. It did change a little bit this past week, but like you said, now that this injury is there, a little bit scary for Quentin Johnston. Are there any players right now that you're looking to buy across fantasy?
I still think you make a buy on Derrick Henry because last week Jackson didn't have his mobility. You could tell he ran one time that I remember. Yeah. They're going to go back to last year's offense right now. Patrick Ricard is finally back and healthy. They will run that they call it the pistol, where Lamar will be in the shotgun, Henry will be on his hip, Ricard's on the field. Defense has got to commit extra people, but the threat of having Jackson and Henry on his hip, defenses don't know what to do with that. Henry averaged 143 yards a game. And look, Henry's old, but his history says when November hits, you start seeing the best of him. Buy Quinshon Judkins. 2 of his last 3 games were terrible, but those guards and center can still block in Cleveland, and Judkins is special. And I do think he'll have a better second half. There'll be down games. I'm buying Travis Etienne. Told people coming out of the bye, I thought they would understand after their bad stretch before the bye, the outside run with him is what their offense could count on. They went back to that, but his numbers weren't great last week. So there's still a buying window. One more. At some point, the Steelers are going to stop throwing 74 passes a game that are tight ends. And DK Metcalf's going to start getting 6 or 7 targets. When he gets that, you want a piece of that.
I like those calls. The DK Metcalf stuff, the Steelers right now, I was looking at this earlier this week. The Steelers wide receiver target share is the second lowest that we've seen from any team since 2011. They're barely over a 40% target share right now. Like,
do you mean 1911 or 2011?
Yeah,
Leather
right.
Helmets?
Exactly. It's crazy. And then the other crazy thing is that Darnell Washington over the last 5 or 6 weeks is out targeting Pat Freiermuth. Like the usage for Washington, he's an interesting player to have offensively, to just, design a couple plays for a game or something like that. But they've used him frequently in that offense over the last handful of weeks.
JJ, they lined him up as the isolated receiver and they threw him the ball
on a key fourth down on a key play. It was, I know it's wild the way that Arthur Smith's brain works and functions. What about the opposite, players that you're looking to sell?
This one will be unpopular. Dalton Kincaid. He does not get more than 6 targets in a game. Yeah. He has 200-yard games in his last 3. He's got a bunch of touchdowns on only 6 targets a game. Only trade him, though, if you could get something of real value in return. Otherwise, you keep him. But if somebody will overpay for that production, 6 targets a game is hard to get them coming. Nico Collins, he might not have a hot market, but that offensive line's not getting better. And I just think that name value, somebody's going to overvalue him. People love Xavier Worthy. But if you're rostering him, you realize it's Rashee Rice and then it's everybody else.
Talk about this. I do my rest of season rankings every week. And every week after I'm done, I like to just see what other analysts are doing and how people are ranking them as a consensus. And I'm 11 spots lower than consensus with Xavier Worthy every week. And you look he's been higher, I think, than wide receiver 29 once this year.
Yes. And that's why you could trade him, JJ. That's exactly why you could trade him, because people believe. I called this one exactly the way it was before the season. You probably did the same thing. This is what happened last year. They drafted Xavier Worthy to be their downfield, stretch the field guy so that everything else could operate underneath. That's why they drafted him. But then Rashee Rice tears his LCL, and then mid-season, they had to move Worthy into the Rice role. So he was catching short and intermediates. You don't want a 165-pound guy running short and intermediates. That does not end well. So when Rice was coming back, it was very clear Rice is going to get the Rice role. And Xavier Worthy's going to get the role he was drafted to be. But that's only a few targets a game. And once in a while, you'll get a deep connection and it'll be great. But no, I'm like you. I'm lower than everybody on him, but you can trade him easily.
Yeah, I feel like Worthy at this point is just like a maybe slightly better version of JMO or something, just the way that they're deploying him in Detroit. But I mean, maybe that's not, maybe it's just the same thing, you know, because like J-Mo's at least giving us these random one-off, like he's generated the big plays, you know, at times this year. And Worthy really hasn't given us that, like, that crazy game yet, you know, like like at least of late. And it's worrisome. But yeah, I mean, like Worthy last year, you know, if you look at his splits, like, I think after their bye in like week 9 or 10 last year, and then even through the playoffs, his ADOT fell by like 3 yards. You know,
took on the Rashee Rice role.
Yeah, they started to deploy him differently, and then that then turned into him being a more viable fantasy option. But yeah, it was the thing for me. I had Worthy as an avoid when I initially published my draft guide, and I had Rice as a target, and then I kind of just said, all right, let's just push this aside because of all this, you know, then the suspension hits and all this kind of stuff. And then it just became a situation where it's like, well, we don't know what's going on. So this is how I feel, but it's going to be pretty unique from draft to draft. But yeah, saw the same thing with Worthy entering the year. All right, I've been doing this with every Perspectives guest. The last thing, we need a bold prediction for week 10.
All right, bold prediction. Quinshon Judkins, 150 yards, 2 touchdowns against the Quinnen Williams-less New York Jets.
Yes, I love the Quinshon call out, by the way. I almost had him as a buy in my 15 transactions column and podcast this week because not only is he just really great between the tackles, like, I mean, I think we would all say easily at this point the best rookie running back in terms of just talent and what he's doing, right? As a runner, at the very least, you know, still some question marks as what his ceiling would be as a receiver, but as a pure runner and just player, he looks great. But the schedule is also awesome for Cleveland, you know, rest of season. So, and then they get a great one that got better with that trade this weekend. So I like that call out of Quinshon Judkins. Jim, this was awesome. I greatly appreciate not only your time, but just any conversation I get to have with you. It's always great. So let everyone know where they can find you, what you're working on, all that great stuff.
I'm on the X at Jim Coventry NFL. I always post my weekly schedule of work, any videos I have and whatnot. I'm on Sirius XM Fantasy Sports Radio, Saturdays, noon to 2 Eastern. Thursday, you're watching the night game, but I am on from 10 to midnight Eastern on Thursday nights as well. And I'm over at rotowire.com. If you want to read my articles, you need a subscription to get a discount on that and get you 15% with the code YouTube15 at rotowire.com.
Awesome. I'm JJ Zacharyson. You guys can find me on Twitter, on Blue Sky at Late Round QB. Make sure you check everything out over on lateround.com. Otherwise, everyone, thanks for tuning in.